theme for this episode is that history is doomed to repeat itself. So, growing up we watched movies like Disney's Hercules or one of my personal favorite movies, Troy, the story of the demigod Achilles. It was part of our English curriculum to read Homer's Odyssey and Iliad, and it was there that we would learn about interesting gods who found amusement in tampering with the lives of the humans who worshipped them. It was in these stories we learned about unbelievably powerful beings with equally powerful personalities. Beings who would create human-sized avatars to fight in the war for Troy, or keep Odysseus away from his home for 2 decades with a series of unfortunate events. And it was here that my love for mythology was sparked, ignited, and had gasoline poured on it. Different questions would race through my mind the more I read. What other stories are there? What else did they do and who else did they affect? But the biggest question that would constantly find its way into my thoughts was, where did they come from? And answering that question is exactly what this episode is going to be about. Who were the Olympians and where did they come from? An important thing to remember is that the story of the Greek gods happened in generations. The first generation is the primordial beings, the second generation is the Titans, and the third generation is the Olympians. I also want to point out that the primordial beings for the most part represent concepts and are the personifications for forces of nature and ideas rather than actual things. In contrast to many other cultural beliefs that say there was nothing, the ancient Greeks believed that in the beginning there was only chaos, pure, unadulterated, shapeless chaos, and for unknown reasons out of that chaos, the primordial beings came into existence and began laying down the foundation for creation, giving shape to the shapeless and time to the timeless. These primordial beings were Gaia, the Mother Earth, Tartarus, the underworld, Erebus, the darkness that covers the underworld, Nyx, the darkness that covers Earth, and Eros, love. Gaia would eventually conceive a child by herself, and that child was named Uranus, who represented the heavens and sky, who would eventually become Gaia's lover, and together they would begin having children. At some point, Nyx and Erebus decided that they wanted to have children of their own, but I'll get to all these other children in detail in a different episode, because they aren't exactly relative to the grand story of how the Olympians came to be. So Gaia and her son/lover Uranus began having children. The first 3 were the Hecatoncheires, who were massive powerful monsters with 50 heads and 100 arms each, and they were named Briareus, Codus, and Gaius. The next 3 were the equally massive and monstrous Cyclopes, Argus, Brontus, and Steropes. Uranus hated and feared his children, thinking that one day they would dethrone him, so he imprisoned them inside of Tartarus. Their next set of children are the more popular Titans, and it goes without saying that Uranus hated them as well, and as each one was born he shoved them back inside of the womb of Gaia. The 6 men and 6 women that comprised the Titans were Oceanus, god of the sea, Thetis, sister and wife of Oceanus, Hyperion, god of the sun, Thea, sister and wife of Hyperion, Themis, an earth goddess, Rhea, an earth goddess, Mnemosyne, goddess of memory, Iapetus, Coeus, Phoebe, and Crius, and these 4 have no notable responsibilities attributed to them. And last but not least, we have Kronos, the youngest, brightest, strongest, and cleverest of all the Titans. This mistreatment of their children caused Gaia great physical pain because she was having to house living divine beings inside of her body, and strained her heart on a maternal level. So she created a giant sickle made of flint and asked her children for help in dealing with Uranus and ending his cruel tyranny. All of the children were too afraid to stand up against their father, except for one, Kronos. So, when Uranus descended upon Gaia to have sex with her, as they did every day, he was met with a surprise. From Gaia's womb, Kronos burst forth and castrated his father, and took his testicles. Blood began falling from the wound into the ocean, and that created even more monsters, most notably the giants and the Furies. As the blood fell and hit the waters, it also began foaming, and Kronos threw his father's testicles into the foam, and from that, the most beautiful of the divine beings came into existence, Aphrodite, who was the goddess of love, beauty, pleasure, and procreation. She drifted around the ocean until she came to the shore on the island of Cyprus, which is why she's often called Cyprian Aphrodite. And this ended the rule of the first generation and began the rule of the second, the rule of the Titans. Kronos freed his fellow Titans, but left his siblings the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires to their fate in Tartarus. Kronos would eventually marry his sister Rhea, and with this, the ghost of his father Uranus came to him and said something along the lines of, "You are a cursed child, who has stained his hands with the blood of his father, and just as you've done to me, the same will happen to you. This prophecy sowed the seeds of paranoia in Kronos, and as Rhea would begin having children, Kronos would come and eat them whole on the day of their birth. He did this to his children Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. After seeing this so many times, feeling the same maternal pain that Gaia felt, Rhea decided to rebel when she was pregnant with Zeus. She secretly descended to the island of Crete and gave birth to Zeus in a cave. Rhea quickly returned to her bedchamber with a rock wrapped in swaddling cloth and pretended to cry out with labor pains. When the yelling stopped, Kronos came into the room and ate the rock without a second thought, and Rhea cried with joy, knowing she'd saved at least one of her children. Kronos mistook this as tears of pain for the loss of another child and didn't think too much about it. The rearing of Zeus was left to the forest nymphs, the most notable of which was a nymph named Adrastea, who raised him on milk from a magical goat named Amalthea. He was protected and taught warfare by the Curetes, who would loudly bang their spears, swords, and shields every time a baby Zeus cried, so as to hide it from Kronos. As Zeus grew, he was taught by an enchanted eagle who would bring him news from all over the world, and would eventually tell him his true identity and what happened to his older brothers and sisters. When Zeus became an adult, he devised a plan to free his siblings, and with the help from the Titan Oceanus, he learned of a potion that could make Kronos throw up his brothers and sisters. Zeus managed to disguise himself as a celestial cupbearer who was eager to serve the king Kronos a nectar of such high quality that it had no equal, and the Titan was more than happy to be served. With this, Zeus tricked Kronos into drinking the potion, and the great Titan became nauseous and threw up a rock, followed by the fully grown gods Hera, Poseidon, Hades, Hestia, and Demeter. A fight ensued, and with the support of his siblings, Zeus managed to castrate his father, whose testicles had fallen into the ocean just like Uranus's, and Zeus claimed the title of supreme god from his father. But this was not the end. This betrayal was the beginning of the Titanomachy, the War of the Titans.
In the red corner, we have Kronos, his Titan allies and brethren who inhabit Mount Othries, and in the blue corner we have Zeus, his siblings, and two Titans, Themis and Prometheus, who inhabit Mount Olympus.
The Titan armies were led by Atlas, the son of Iapetus, and Zeus acknowledged their power, so he looked for reinforcements. Remember earlier when I said that Kronos only freed his fellow Titans and left the others to their fate? Well, this is the part of the story where that detail becomes important. Zeus went to Tartarus and freed the Cyclopes, and with good reason, they became allies of Zeus, and happily forged powerful weapons for some of the Olympians. They gave Zeus his thunder and lightning, Poseidon his trident, and Hades was given the Helm of Terror, which granted him invisibility. The battles began, and every time the two sides met, the world shook. The ground shattered, the sky cracked with lightning and boomed with thunder. Powerful winds ravaged the land, and entire mountains were thrown and used as weapons. After some battles, it was believed by both sides that the Titans had the advantage. So once again, Zeus returned to Tartarus and freed the monstrous Hecatonchires, whose powers were more than enough to turn the tide of the war. The Titans retreated with the shadow of their impending defeat looming over their head. The last battle came to fruition, and both sides fought savagely, scarring the planet and rearranging the landscape over and over and over again, until finally Zeus struck Kronos with his mighty bolts, sending the once great Titan king to his knees. And with this, after 10 brutal years, the Titanomachy came to an end, and Zeus sentenced Kronos and all of his allies to spend eternity inside of Tartarus, all of them except for one, Atlas. Poseidon created powerful gates to ensure that the Titan armies remained sealed inside of Tartarus, and the Hecatonchires were charged with guarding them. You see, Zeus held a special grudge against Atlas, who had led the Titan armies against him so well that he gave him a special punishment. He was sentenced to hold the weight of the world on his shoulders for all of eternity. Seeing the treatment of her children angered Gaia. In her maternal fury, she set upon enacting her vengeance against Zeus. Her vengeance and wrath was embodied by her youngest son, whom she had with Tartarus, named Typhon. So, in Greek mythology, Typhon is considered the father of all monsters, and his wife Echidna was the mother. Being the father of all monsters, Typhon definitely had the appearance and ominous aura deserving of his title. He was a giant that was so tall that his head touched the stars. His torso was that of a man, but his legs were coils of vipers that would hiss and attack as he moved. His main head had on it 100 snake heads that would make the sounds of different animals. His eyes glowed red with fire and would terrify everyone who looked upon them. And he had a savage maw which would breathe fire. His body had hundreds of different wings on it, and his hands were made up of 100 snake coils, just like his legs. He was a soot-black color, and all of his hair was matted. Typhon's power was so imposing and absolute that he struck fear into the Olympian gods. He scared them so much that they had turned into their animal forms so that they wouldn't be recognized and fled to Egypt. A battle ensued, and Typhon ended up besting Zeus. He dragged him off to a cave and removed some tendons to make it so that the god could not escape and so that Typhon could torture the god at his leisure, and charged his wife Echidna with guarding the great Olympian king's tendons. Hermes and Pan decided they needed to help Zeus, and so they stole his tendons and went to the cave and returned them to their rightful owner. With this, Zeus escaped and lived to fight another day. After this, a 10,000-year battle ensued between Typhon and the gods, and finally Zeus struck Typhon in the head with his mightiest bolt, dropping the monster. He cast Typhon into Tartarus and placed a mountain over the hole to prevent him from ever escaping. Because Typhon breathed fire, this mountain became a volcano due to the sheer amount of power he had, and this mountain is now called Mount Etna. It is even believed that earthquakes are caused by Typhon moving and trying to escape his prison. Dividing up the spoils of war, the brothers Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades drew straws. Zeus drew the tallest straw and thus took dominion of the heavens. Poseidon took the middle straw, so he got dominion over the sea, and Hades was left with the short end of the stick, so he was given dominion of the underworld. And with that, the rule of the Titans had completely ended and ushered in and cemented the power of the Olympians as we know them. If you've listened this far, I want to say thank you. This story by all means isn't the only version of how the Olympians came to be, and if I'm being completely honest with you, it's a patchwork of multiple versions. I wanted to tell the story in a way that would make sense and flow better. If you're listening to this podcast and you're probably interested in mythology already, and you're somewhat familiar with it, and may even be confused by how I told it, because you may have heard a different version. There are versions where Gaia raised Zeus, versions where Kronos didn't lose his testicles, versions where Kronos imprisoned the Cyclopes and Hecatonchires, tons of versions of how Typhon and Zeus battled, so on and so forth. You kind of get the picture. The point is that there was a story I wanted to tell you, so I made one that I believed made the most sense, and was the most entertaining. Also keep in mind that this is a broad story from the gods' perspectives. There are a few details between different gods that led to the decisions that they made in this story, specifically Prometheus, but I feel like Prometheus deserves an episode to himself, so look forward to that in the future. Once again, I want to say thank you for listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or know someone who might like it, please share it with them. If you want to support this podcast so that I can keep doing this and putting out the content that you want to hear, there's a link in the description below. You can click on it or copy and paste it, and it's pretty straightforward from there. Please leave a rating and review of this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to it on. It helps out more than you know, and doesn't take that much time. Thanks for listening, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you tune in to the next one.